On August 6th, while cleanup operations were still underway in the aftermath of recent flooding, a local resident was out walking his dog through a section of land that had recently dried. As he moved through the area, he noticed something out of place. As he got closer, his sense of unease grew. Shaken, he immediately called 911 to report the discovery. Emergency services arrived at the scene promptly. The area was secured, and the evidence were carefully recovered and transported to the county forensic laboratory for further examination. At the lab, forensic pathologists began their analysis. Based on the condition, they estimated that the person had likely died over a month earlier. This timeline aligned closely with the disappearance of Adrienne Salinas. To confirm the identity, a DNA test was performed. After several days of processing and analysis, the results came back. It was Adrienne Salinas. Every crime has its own story, and we're here to tell it to you, our dear viewers. Like, comment, and subscribe. Stay with us. Adrienne Celeste Salinas came into the world on a bright and chilly morning, November 5, 1993, in Phoenix, Arizona, a city known for its desert beauty, resilient spirit, and wide skies. As the firstborn of Rick and Pauline Salinas, Adrienne was welcomed with immense love and anticipation. Her arrival marked a joyful chapter in the lives of her young parents, who had recently settled into a cozy home in a modest but friendly neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. 2 years after Adrienne's birth, the Salinas family grew once more with the arrival of her younger brother, Nathaniel. His birth was celebrated with equal excitement, and for a time, the family enjoyed the simple happiness of shared meals, bedtime stories, and afternoon picnics in Encanto Park. Rick and Pauline seemed deeply devoted to their children, building a home filled with warmth, laughter, and music. Pauline especially loved to sing while cooking, and Adrienne often danced along, giggling, while holding her baby brother's tiny hands. However, life took a sudden and devastating turn not long after Nathaniel's birth. Pauline began experiencing mysterious health issues, fatigue that wouldn't go away, persistent pain, and troubling symptoms that no amount of rest seemed to cure. After a series of tests and consultations, she received a diagnosis that turned their world upside down. The illness she faced was aggressive and unforgiving. Despite years of treatments, hospital visits, and moments of fleeting hope, Pauline's health continued to decline. When Pauline passed away, it left an unfillable void in the lives of her family. She was only in her early 30s. Adrienne was 5 years old, a bright-eyed child with ribbons in her hair and a deep love for bedtime fairy tales. Nathaniel, barely 3, had only just begun to form complete sentences. Though too young to fully understand the weight of the loss, the absence of their mother would shape them in ways that would only become clear as they grew older. Rick Salinas, once a cheerful man who loved playing guitar on weekends and watching baseball with friends, was transformed almost overnight. Grief-stricken but determined, he embraced the full responsibility of single parenthood with quiet resolve. He worked long hours at a mid-sized logistics company, often juggling spreadsheets and client calls during the day, while attending parent-teacher meetings and sports practices in the evenings. Despite the exhaustion, Rick made sure Adrienne and Nathaniel never felt alone. He prepared their lunches, helped with homework, told them stories, and listened to their smallest worries as if they were the most important matters in the world. To stay close to his children, Rick became actively involved in their school life. He volunteered as a part-time coach at their school, leading Adrienne's volleyball team and mentoring Nathaniel's youth football squad. He wasn't just a father, he was their role model, their rock, and the person who always showed up, rain or shine. This unwavering love forged an incredibly close bond between Rick and his children. Adrienne, in particular, often turned to him with her thoughts and fears, her dreams and dilemmas. She trusted him implicitly, knowing that no matter what, he would always stand by her side. The trio became a tight-knit unit, leaning on each other, moving forward step by step. Adrienne blossomed into a radiant and spirited young woman. Her personality was a magnetic blend of charm, empathy, and quiet determination. She had a gift for making others feel seen and heard, traits that earned her many friends and admirers. Her athletic build, graceful features, and confident smile made her stand out in any crowd. But it was her kindness and sharp wit that truly made people gravitate toward her. It was around the age of 14 when Adrienne met Francisco Artiga, a boy with a captivating smile and a mischievous twinkle in his eye. A year older and attending the same school, Francisco shared Adrienne's love for music, classic movies, and hiking through the desert trails surrounding Phoenix. Their connection was instant. What began as long conversations during lunch breaks and shared laughter in study halls soon evolved into a deeper, more intimate bond. By the time they reached their senior year, Adrienne believed she had found something truly special in Francisco. He became her first real love, the kind of deep emotional connection that shapes a teenager's worldview. But beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect teenage relationship lay a complexity that Adrienne often struggled to face. While she was fully invested emotionally, Francisco remained elusive about commitment. He avoided defining their relationship, often stating that he was too young to be tied down, that he wanted to experience life without restrictions. His actions reflected this belief. He casually dated other girls, never hiding it from Adrienne, and though these flings were usually short-lived, they left her wounded. Still, whenever he returned to her, sometimes with a bouquet, sometimes with just a soft apology, she forgave him. She never stopped believing that in time, he would understand the depth of what they shared. Her loyalty never wavered. Adrienne waited, quietly enduring the emotional roller coaster of Francisco's inconsistency. Despite the turbulence in her personal life, Adrienne remained focused on her future. From an early age, she dreamed of becoming a journalist, a voice for truth and change. Her curiosity and articulate nature made her a natural storyteller. After high school, she enrolled in the University of Arizona's prestigious journalism and public relations program, eager to build a career that combined her passion for people and the power of media. Although the university was located in her hometown, Adrienne made the deliberate choice to move out and live independently. She wanted to experience adulthood on her own terms. She found a comfortable, sunlit apartment in a peaceful part of the city and moved in with two of her closest friends, Alexandra Rios and Ashley Dugan. The three young women had been inseparable since their high school years, forming a bond rooted in mutual trust, shared experiences, and unwavering loyalty. They had been there for each other through every heartbreak, every exam season, every late-night phone call that ended in laughter or tears. Moving in together during college had seemed like the natural next step, and their shared apartment quickly became a sanctuary where each of them felt safe, supported, and understood. The living arrangement was ideal. Each woman had her own private bedroom, providing them all with the personal space they needed, while the common areas were filled with warm decor, pictures from high school, and string lights that gave the apartment a cozy, lived-in charm. Their schedules were busy and often unpredictable, but they always made time to eat meals together, talk about their days, and check in on each other's emotional well-being. The apartment wasn't just a place to stay. It was home. Rick Salinas, Adrienne's father, had fully supported his daughter's decision to move out. Though the thought of an empty nest tugged at his heart, he also recognized how important it was for Adrienne to learn independence and create a life of her own. The fact that her new home was just a 20-minute drive from the family house gave him peace of mind. They maintained a close connection, speaking frequently by phone, exchanging text messages daily, and visiting often enough that it never felt like they were far apart. On her 18th birthday, Rick had given Adrienne a thoughtful and practical gift: a reliable used car. It wasn't flashy, but it was hers, and it meant freedom. It allowed her to drive home regularly, whether for Sunday dinners, quick check-ins, or unexpected emotional moments when she simply needed to see her father's face. Their bond had always been deep, forged in the painful years after her mother's passing, and it only grew stronger as she matured. College life brought new challenges and joys for Adrienne. She thrived in her academic environment, quickly gaining the admiration of her professors and the respect of her classmates. Balancing coursework with a vibrant social calendar, Adrienne was one of those students who seemed to do it all, gracefully, energetically, and without missing a beat. Her natural charisma made her a beloved figure on campus, and her determination set her apart. She was well on her way to building a promising future in journalism and public relations. But midway through her second semester, something changed. Adrienne began experiencing an unshakable cough. It started subtly, just a dry irritation she attributed to allergies or perhaps a lingering cold. She downplayed it, relying on over-the-counter remedies. But the cough didn't go away. Within weeks, the symptoms escalated. The coughing became more violent, and she started to feel breathless doing simple tasks like walking upstairs or carrying her backpack. Her roommates noticed her growing fatigue, her paler complexion, and how she struggled to sleep through the night. Still, Adrienne dismissed the concerns of her friends, insisting it was nothing serious. That changed when one evening she collapsed while trying to catch her breath. She was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Doctors soon delivered a diagnosis that stunned everyone. Adrienne was suffering from a rare but aggressive fungal infection in her lungs. It had gone undetected for too long and had done extensive damage. Emergency surgery was necessary to remove a large portion of her left lung. It was a harrowing procedure, one that came with risks and no guarantees. Despite the gravity of her condition, Adrienne displayed the same resilience that had seen her through so many hardships before. Her body, still youthful and strong, responded well to treatment. Within a month, she was discharged from the hospital and continued her recovery from home. With determination and support from her father and roommates, she made a surprisingly fast return to her academic routine. By the time fall semester began, Adrienne was not only back in class but excelling once again, an inspiration to everyone around her. On June 14, 2013, Adrienne and her roommates decided to host a birthday celebration at their apartment. The event had been planned for weeks, and their social circle was buzzing with excitement. Around 40 guests showed up that evening, filling the apartment with energy, music, laughter, and the usual youthful chaos of college parties. Among the attendees was Francisco Artiga, Adrienne's longtime on-and-off boyfriend. What should have been a night of joy and celebration soon took a different tone. According to several guests, Adrienne seemed withdrawn from the start, her usual sparkle noticeably absent. As the evening wore on, she spent more and more time in her room, alone, away from the music and mingling crowd. The reason? Another argument with Francisco. Witnesses recalled seeing Francisco openly flirting with another girl at the party, barely acknowledging Adrienne's presence. For someone who had always remained faithful to him, who had never so much as entertained the advances of other men, this public slight felt deeply humiliating. Tensions boiled over just before midnight. Francisco repeated what he had told her many times before. He wasn't ready for anything serious. He wanted freedom. Adrienne, hurt and overwhelmed, left the conversation and locked herself in her room. For a while, no one disturbed her. Then Francisco knocked on her door. What was said in private remains unknown, but shortly after, the two were seen leaving the apartment together. What happened next remains the subject of much speculation. Sometime later that night, Adrienne returned to the apartment. This time, alone. She entered her room briefly, gathered a few personal belongings, and then left again. That moment would be the last time anyone reported seeing her. The next day, Alexandra and Ashley slept in, waking up around noon. The aftermath of the party greeted them. Discarded plastic cups, pizza boxes, sticky floors, and a broken chair. The usual chaos. Initially, they assumed Adrienne was simply sleeping off the night behind her closed door and didn't think to check. Even when they realized she wasn't in the apartment later that day, they assumed she had stayed over at Francisco's or perhaps gone to visit her father. There was no reason, yet, to panic. But as the hours passed, unease began to creep in. Texts to Adrienne went unanswered. Her phone rang, but no one picked up. They still didn't call the police, believing she'd show up soon. It wasn't until 2 days later, on June 16th, Father's Day, that her absence took on a chilling new weight. Rick Salinas had been eagerly awaiting Adrienne's arrival that day. Father's Day had always held deep meaning for them. Every year they made it special, cooking dinner together, reminiscing, watching their favorite old movies. But this year, Adrienne neither showed up nor called. More alarmingly, her phone had been turned off. This was completely unlike her. Rick knew immediately that something wasn't right. Without hesitation, he got in his car and drove to his daughter's apartment. He arrived to find Alexandra and Ashley surprised by his presence, and shocked when he asked if Adrienne was home. When they admitted they hadn't seen her since the night of the party, the gravity of the situation became undeniable. After contacting Francisco and learning he also hadn't seen Adrienne since the night of the party, Rick wasted no time. He drove straight to the local police department and officially reported his daughter missing. There was no time to waste. Something felt terribly wrong, and instinct told him she wasn't just staying away for space. The local authorities treated Rick's report seriously, particularly given Adrienne's recent health history, her normally responsible behavior, and the unusual circumstances surrounding her disappearance. A team of detectives was immediately assigned to the case. Within hours, they arrived at Adrienne's apartment, where her roommates, still stunned by the turn of events, walked them through everything they could remember about the party, the guests, and Adrienne's final known movements. The investigators' first objective was clear: reconstruct a minute-by-minute timeline of the night Adrienne was last seen. Nothing could be overlooked. No conversation too small, no guest unimportant. The detectives began by collecting a list of every person who had attended the gathering. Interviews were scheduled. Some guests were contacted by phone. Others were asked to come in person to provide statements. Many admitted they were heavily intoxicated that night, making it difficult to recall specific moments. Still, each detail could hold a key. Simultaneously, forensic experts conducted a detailed search of Adrienne's room. While the scene didn't show obvious signs of a struggle, what they did find raised several red flags. Her wallet, complete with cash, her ID, and her bank cards, was still sitting inside a purse under her desk. More perplexing was the fact that her cell phone, allegedly taken with her when she left, was lying face down on the nightstand. Its battery had died, but detectives knew it could still hold important information, such as recent call logs, text messages, and GPS data. Perhaps the most curious discovery was the single car key resting on the carpet just beside her bed. Adrienne didn't own a spare, and this was her only way to access and start her vehicle. Yet her car wasn't parked anywhere near the apartment. How could she have driven away if her only key had been left behind? The finding contradicted the timeline provided by her friends and raised an unsettling possibility. Someone else might have moved the vehicle. Naturally, suspicion quickly centered on Francisco Artiga. As Adrienne's former boyfriend and the last known person to have seen her, he was brought in for questioning. Calm but visibly nervous, Francisco admitted to arguing with Adrienne that night. According to him, the disagreement had been sparked by her jealousy. He claimed the situation escalated, but that they eventually reconciled and chose to leave the party together in his car. He described what he said happened next. While driving, the argument flared up again. Adrienne, growing emotional and frustrated, demanded that he pull over. Francisco said he stopped near a side street, and Adrienne exited the vehicle, choosing to walk back home alone. He claimed he watched her disappear down the sidewalk and then drove off, thinking she simply needed space. He also told detectives that later that night, he turned off his phone and went to sleep, supposedly unaware that Adrienne had tried to reach him dozens of times. In the early hours of the morning, investigators later confirmed Adrienne had indeed made approximately 50 unanswered calls to Francisco's number. She also sent him a final text message that read, "I'm coming over." That message, in retrospect, might have marked the last time Adrienne communicated with anyone. According to a working theory developed by detectives, Adrienne had possibly walked back to the apartment, picked up her car key, and left again to drive to Francisco's house. Her determination to confront him or resolve things might have clouded her judgment, especially after such an emotionally charged night. But there was another version of events emerging from the forensic timeline, one that only deepened the mystery. If Adrienne had left with her key, returned to change clothes, and then left again, why would she later be found without the key or phone? More importantly, what happened during the gaps in time that no one could yet explain? The breakthrough came when police reviewed incident logs from local traffic reports. Just after 4 a.m. on the same night, a concerned citizen had called in to report witnessing a silver Chevrolet, later identified as Adrienne's car, lose control near a sharp curve, strike a curb, and blow out its front tires. The front bumper was seen tearing away from the vehicle during the impact. The witness, an early morning delivery driver, had initially attempted to approach the scene to offer help. But before he could get close, the car suddenly accelerated and sped away, despite the extensive damage. To the witness, it looked like the driver might have been intoxicated or panicking, possibly fleeing the scene to avoid legal consequences. This new lead prompted an expanded search of the surrounding area. The very next day, Rick and Francisco, who had joined in the effort to locate Adrienne, were canvassing nearby streets when they came upon the vehicle. It was hidden in a narrow alleyway, wedged between two industrial dumpsters, only a few blocks from Adrienne's apartment. Just as the earlier witness had described, the silver Chevrolet was in poor condition. Both front tires were destroyed, the bumper nearly hanging off, and one side of the vehicle bore deep scratches. Crime scene investigators arrived quickly to process the car for evidence. Yet, what they found was both puzzling and unsettling. There were no visible signs inside the vehicle, no broken glass, no DNA. No items appeared to be missing, and the interior was relatively clean. Even more confusing, the doors were locked, and the alarm system had been armed, suggesting someone had exited the vehicle and taken steps to secure it. Fingerprints were limited, mostly Adrienne's and those of her roommates, who had driven with her in the past. No unknown prints were discovered. The pressing question remained: where did Adrienne go without money or a phone? And more pressing, what happened to her after she disappeared from the apartment for the last time? Was someone else involved? Was this a tragic accident or something far more sinister? Despite growing suspicion and scattered theories, no one had definitive answers. As with most missing persons investigations, the people closest to Adrienne were scrutinized first. Francisco, her former boyfriend, remained at the center of the early inquiries. His last known contact with her and his admission to having argued with Adrienne the night she went missing placed him in a critical position. Yet, after agreeing to a polygraph examination and passing, and with no physical evidence linking him to foul play, he was eventually ruled out as a person of interest. Then came a subtle but potentially important lead. Phone records revealed that shortly before she left the apartment for the final time, Adrienne had attempted to book a ride. Her first attempt was with a traditional cab service, but the call went unanswered. Undeterred, she made one final call from her phone, this time to a small, family-owned local transport company that operated late-night rides in East Phoenix. That call would prove to be the last activity recorded from Adrienne's device. The company in question was run by Thomas Simon Sr. and his son, Thomas Simon Jr., who handled many of the late-night pickups. Detectives moved quickly to reach out to both men. Given the urgency of the case, they opted for phone interviews rather than wait for formal meetings. Thomas Sr. answered from the office, cooperative and polite. He confirmed the company had received a call from a young woman matching Adrienne's description during the early morning hours of June 15th. At the same time, Thomas Jr., who was on the road with a passenger, pulled over to speak with investigators. His account was straightforward, at least on the surface. He told detectives that a young woman had indeed contacted him, asking for a ride. Because he was already transporting a client, they agreed on a plan. She would walk to a nearby gas station where he could pick her up shortly after finishing his current drop-off. It was a casual arrangement, nothing out of the ordinary in his line of work. But something did not go according to plan. According to Thomas Jr., When he arrived at the gas station roughly 15 minutes later, the woman was not there. He claimed he waited for several minutes, scanned the area, and even tried to call the number back, but received no answer. With no sign of the passenger, he eventually left the location and continued his shift. Surveillance footage from the gas station appeared to support part of his account. Security cameras recorded Thomas Jr.'s car pulling into the parking lot at around 4:30 a.m. He remained there for approximately 15 minutes before driving away. No one matching Adrienne's appearance was seen on the footage. It was as if she had agreed to the meeting and then disappeared before she could ever arrive. Later that same day, a new and unsettling detail emerged. Authorities received a call from a woman who had been the passenger in Thomas Jr.'s vehicle at the time he took the call from investigators. She didn't initially know about Adrienne's disappearance, but felt compelled to speak after observing what she described as disturbing behavior. According to her statement, after Thomas Jr. ended the phone call with detectives, he appeared visibly anxious, nervous in a way that struck her as unusual for someone simply speaking to law enforcement. She claimed that shortly after hanging up, he pulled the vehicle to the side of the road, got out, and opened the trunk. What she saw next deeply unsettled her. Thomas Jr. retrieved what looked like a saw from the trunk, held it for a moment, and then placed it back before continuing the ride. She didn't know what it meant, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something about the moment wasn't right. This testimony escalated the situation. Investigators immediately requested a warrant to search Thomas Jr.'s vehicle and home, hoping to find any items that could either corroborate or dispel the woman's claim. The search was conducted thoroughly, but yielded no physical evidence of wrongdoing. No saw was found in the trunk. No suspicious materials were discovered at his residence. No forensic evidence linked him to Adrienne. Despite his visible frustration and increasingly combative attitude during questioning, Thomas Jr. refused to submit to a polygraph test. Still, legally, refusal to comply with a polygraph isn't grounds for arrest. With no solid evidence connecting him to Adrienne's disappearance, authorities had no choice but to release him and classify him only as a person of interest, not a suspect. At this point, the investigation hit a painful and demoralizing standstill. Leads dried up. Media attention waned. Then, on July 21st, more than a month after Adrienne was last seen, an unexpected and violent storm swept across the eastern parts of Phoenix. In an area better known for its dry climate and scorching sun, the sky darkened and opened up with torrential rain. Thunder roared overhead, and flash floods turned once dusty streets into rushing streams. Local rivers overflowed, sweeping away trash bins, tree branches, and even parked vehicles. It was the worst flooding event the area had seen in over a decade. 2 weeks later, on August 6th, as cleanup efforts continued, a local resident walking his dog through a now-dried section of land came across something unusual. A partial shape, partially buried in mud and debris. Horrified, he realized it was a human and immediately called 911. Emergency services responded quickly and secured the scene. The evidence was transported to the county forensic lab, where pathologists confirmed that the individual had likely died over a month earlier, consistent with the timeline of Adrienne's disappearance. And also, one unmistakable clue helped narrow the possibilities: surgical scars on the chest and the absence of a portion of the left lung. These matched Adrienne's known medical history. DNA testing was conducted, and several days later, it was confirmed. It was Adrienne Salinas. She had been found approximately 30 miles from her last known location. Unfortunately, due to the damage caused by both time and nature, a definitive cause of death could not be determined. Search teams returned to the area with tracking dogs in hopes of finding Adrienne's missing personal belongings. But nothing else was found. With no new leads, no suspects, and no physical evidence pointing investigators toward a clear direction, the case of Adrienne Salinas' mysterious disappearance and tragic death quietly grew cold. Detectives had exhausted every resource available at the time, followed every plausible theory, and retraced every step Adrienne had taken in the hours before she vanished. but to no avail. As months turned into a year, and then into 2, the active investigation gradually slowed. Files were archived, interviews halted, and the case, heartbreaking as it was eventually placed on indefinite hold. Yet fate had one more twist to offer. Nearly 2 years after Adrian had been discovered, an unexpected tip reignited interest in the case. A man by the name of Kim Aria walked into a Phoenix police station in the spring of 2015, requesting to speak with investigators. What he shared was not definitive evidence, but it was enough to raise eyebrows and compel law enforcement to take another look. He told officers that he had reason to believe one of his longtime acquaintances, a man named Brian Patrick Miller, may have had some kind of involvement in Adrian's disappearance. Miller was no stranger to attention, though the kind he attracted was anything but ordinary. In his mid-40s at the time, Brian was a regular figure in local subcultures, particularly at cosplay conventions, themed parties, and fantasy gatherings. In his everyday life, however, Miller was markedly different. Described by those who knew him as deeply reserved, socially withdrawn, and intensely private. According to Kim Aria, this contrast had always been unsettling. But it wasn't until 2015 that his unease turned into alarm. That year, Miller's name made headlines when he was arrested and charged in connection with 2 long unsolved crimes from the early 1990s, cases that had haunted Phoenix detectives for decades. In an unexpected turn of events, Brian Miller voluntarily submitted a DNA sample as part of an online ancestry search, a decision that would ultimately lead to his downfall. The sample, which was entered into a genealogical database, triggered a match, not 2 distant relatives, but to DNA collected from one of the historic crime scenes. That hit prompted investigators to re-examine Miller's history in detail, and as they connected more dots, charges were eventually filed. Motivated by this chilling thought, Kim began re-examining his personal notes, looking for anything that might connect Miller to Adrian. To his shock, he found an entry dated the very night Adrian vanished. According to his journal, Brian Miller had attended a private costume-themed party in a residential neighborhood not far from Adrian's apartment. In fact, it was only a few blocks away. That alone didn't confirm contact between the two, but it introduced a possibility investigator had never previously considered. Adrian, walking alone in the early morning hours, could have encountered Miller by chance. Adding yet another layer of suspicion, Aria pointed out that Miller worked at a facility near the very river where Adrian was eventually discovered weeks after a devastating flood. This detail, while circumstantial, raised troubling possibilities. Authorities took the information seriously. A new team of investigators began re-reviewing the case file. Search warrants were issued, and Miller's residence and vehicle were examined in hopes of uncovering evidence that might link him to Adrian's case. But despite the renewed effort, the searches came up empty. Without forensic evidence or credible eyewitness testimony to contradict him, law enforcement could go no further. Suspicion alone was not enough to pursue legal action. The similarities between Adrian's case and the crimes for which Miller had now been charged were difficult to ignore. In April 2023, nearly a decade after his name first surfaced in connection to Adrian's case, Brian Patrick Miller finally stood trial. Not for Adrian, but for the murders of Angela Brasso and Melanie Bernas. After weeks of emotional testimony and forensic analysis, the jury returned its verdict. Guilty on all counts. Miller was sentenced to 30 years for each crime. But for the family and friends of Adrienne Salinas, the trial brought only partial closure. Her case had never reached court. No charges were filed. No trial was held. And while Miller remained a person of interest in the minds of many, the absence of concrete evidence meant her case could not move forward. At around 10:30 in the morning, Karina tried calling Faith to ask if she could give her a ride back home. When Faith didn't pick up the phone, Karina reached out to another friend who came instead. Together, they went back to the apartment, entering without concern. They assumed Faith had simply overslept after a long night out. As they stepped inside, They called out her name, expecting to hear her familiar voice in reply. The silence that lingered in the air was the first unsettling sign that something was wrong. When Karina walked farther into the apartment, it quickly became clear that something tragic had happened. The atmosphere inside was heavy, marked by an immediate sense of dread. Police officers soon arrived on the scene. What they found inside the apartment was deeply disturbing. Even experienced investigators were shaken. Faith had been the victim of a brutal attack. Despite efforts to help her, it was already too late. At just 19 years old, with her entire future ahead of her, Faith was pronounced dead at the scene. Dear viewers, please don't forget to like, leave a comment under the video, and subscribe to the channel so as not to miss new videos. This is very important to us. Faith Danielle Hedgepeth was born on September 26, 1992, in the quiet countryside of Warren County, North Carolina. She carried with her not only the love of her family, but also the cultural pride of the Haliwa-Saponi Native American tribe, a community with deep roots and rich traditions. Faith's early life was shaped by the values of her heritage and the strength of a close-knit family that, despite hardships, remained bound together by love and perseverance. Her parents separated during her infancy, a change that placed her upbringing largely in the hands of her devoted mother, Connie, and her older sister, Rolanda. Even so, Faith never lost the special connection she shared with her father, Roland. He would often describe her as the very reason he found the courage to confront his most difficult battles with addiction. To him, Faith was more than a daughter. She was the light that gave him a second chance at life. Her presence, he once said, gave him hope when hope seemed out of reach. From an early age, Faith's intelligence and determination stood out. She excelled academically, consistently achieving grades that reflected not just natural ability, but also a relentless work ethic. Her efforts earned her the prestigious Gates Millennium Scholarship, an award that opened doors to opportunities she had long dreamed of. With this scholarship, she enrolled at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, one of the state's most renowned universities. At first, she chose biology as her major, imagining a career in medicine. But the transition to university life was not easy. The workload, combined with financial pressures, presented challenges that might have discouraged others. Faith, however, was not easily deterred. She shifted her academic focus, changed her major, and worked 2 jobs to help support herself. Through it all, she carried with her a dream: to become the first member of her family to graduate from college. Whether she chose the path of a pediatrician or a teacher, her goals reflected her nurturing heart and her deep commitment to helping others. Faith's life at Chapel Hill included not only academics, but also a strong sense of community. She became involved with Alpha Pi Omega, the nation's oldest Native American sorority. The group's mission resonated deeply with her, and she envisioned herself becoming a part of it one day. Faith also found companionship in her living situation. She shared an apartment at Hawthorne at The View, just minutes from campus, with her close friend and former roommate, Karina Rosie Rosario. Their friendship, like many in college, was marked by laughter, shared ambitions, and the kind of support only young adults navigating life's uncertainties can offer each other. Yet not everything in the apartment was peaceful. For a time, Karina's boyfriend Eric also lived there. His presence strained the household atmosphere as his relationship with Karina grew increasingly volatile. Their frequent conflicts, breakups, and reconciliations added tension to the once stable home. At one point, Eric attempted to enter the apartment despite no longer being welcome, even after Karina had changed the locks. With Faith's help, Karina secured a protective order, but the problem persisted when Eric moved into another unit in the same complex. Though technically apart, his proximity was unsettling, and it cast an uneasy shadow over their sense of safety. September 6, 2012, began as an ordinary day for Faith. She attended her classes as usual, and later took part in an event hosted by Alpha Pi Omega. Though she left the gathering by 7:15 p.m. to work on a history paper about her tribe, the evening was far from over. Around 8 p.m., she and Karina went to the campus library. Faith left briefly but returned around 11:30 p.m., and by midnight, the two young women were back at their apartment. Feeling the pull of college nightlife, they decided to go out to the Thrill, a popular club known for admitting students under 21. Surveillance footage later showed Faith and Karina arriving at the club around 12:40 a.m. The two friends spent time on the dance floor enjoying music and each other's company. For more than an hour, they moved with the energy and carefree joy of young students. However, by 2 a.m., Karina began to feel unwell from drinking, and the two decided to leave. Cameras recorded them exiting the club at 2:07 a.m., with Faith driving them home. Once back at their apartment, Karina reportedly grew ill and went to bed almost immediately. Around 3 a.m., a neighbor later reported hearing loud, unusual noises coming from their unit. The description was vague. Perhaps something being dropped or furniture being shifted. At the time, it was impossible to know what it meant. Digital records provided other glimpses of Faith's final hours. At approximately 3:30 a.m., her Facebook page showed signs of activity, followed minutes later by a message sent from her phone to Brandon Edwards, a former boyfriend of Karina's. The message read, "Hey B, can you come over here please? Rosario needs you more, You know, please let her know you care." Brandon did not see the message until much later the next afternoon. At 4:16 p.m., he responded, asking who had reached out. But by then, no reply would come. During that same time frame, Karina's phone also showed outgoing calls to Brandon, suggesting overlapping attempts to contact him. Meanwhile, Faith herself sent a final known message at 3:52 a.m., this time to her on and off boyfriend, Ty Michael McNeil. In it, she wrote tenderly, "I know you're probably sleeping, but I just wanted to let you know that I love you." At 4:25 a.m., Karina left the apartment when a friend, Jordan McCrae, picked her up. She assumed Faith was asleep and, without much thought, left the door unlocked. The following morning, around 10:30 a.m., Karina attempted to call Faith to ask for a ride back. When she didn't answer, Karina contacted another friend, Marisol Rangel, who picked her up instead. Together, they returned to the apartment shortly before 11 a.m., expecting to find Faith resting. They entered the apartment casually, believing she had simply slept in after a long night. Calling out her name, they waited for a reply. The silence that met them was the first sign that something was not as it should be. When Karina entered the apartment, it was immediately clear that something terrible had taken place. There were unmistakable signs that Faith Hedgepeth had been the victim of a violent assault. Yet strangely, there were no signs of forced entry. This detail suggested that the person responsible had either been let inside willingly or had some way of entering without raising suspicion. It was Karina, Faith's roommate and friend, who dialed 911 that morning. Her voice on the call reflected panic, disbelief, and shock. When police officers arrived, the scene inside the apartment left even veteran law enforcement officials unsettled. Faith had been attacked with overwhelming force. The crime was not just tragic. It carried with it a sense of cruelty that felt deeply personal. Despite immediate efforts, it was too late. Faith, only 19 years old and full of promise, was declared dead at the scene. In the days, weeks, and eventually months that followed, investigators began piecing together what had happened in the early hours of September 7th, 2012. Every discovery revealed disturbing details, yet each new piece of information seemed to raise as many questions as it answered. One of the first major breakthroughs came from DNA testing. Forensic specialists found genetic material that matched DNA samples left elsewhere in the apartment. This gave detectives a biological profile of the suspect, though not yet a name. A Bacardi rum bottle recovered from the bedroom quickly became one of the most significant items of evidence. On it were traces of both DNA and tissue fragments, suggesting that it may have been used in the attack. Nearby, investigators discovered a fast food bag from Time Out Chicken. Across the bag was a message written in black marker. "I'm not stupid." The strange note became one of the most puzzling aspects of the case. Experts debated whether it was a genuine clue left in anger or a calculated attempt to confuse investigators. Handwriting specialist Peggy Waller examined the scrawled words and determined that the note was written in a disguised style. In other words, the person who wrote it had deliberately altered their handwriting to avoid being identified. This led investigators to believe that the killer had premeditated at least some aspects of the crime and wanted to mislead those who would eventually study the evidence. Faith's death shocked the community of Chapel Hill to its core. This was a town known for its thriving student population, vibrant campus life, and generally low levels of serious crime. Homicides were exceedingly rare, fewer than one per year. To lose a young woman who embodied such promise and positivity struck the community like a lightning bolt. Chapel Hill Police Chief Chris Blue described the case as one of the most extensive homicide investigations in the state's history. Still, despite its high profile, updates remained scarce. For Faith's grieving family, the silence was agonizing. They waited months, then years, for answers that never seemed to arrive. It wasn't until 2 years later that they learned of the handwritten note left at the scene. Likewise, they were not granted access to the autopsy report until much later. Many details remained sealed under a court order, an unusual move that frustrated not only the family, but also community members following the case. By December of 2012, the FBI had formally joined the investigation. Their involvement brought additional resources and expertise. Federal investigators developed a psychological profile of the suspect. They theorized that the individual responsible likely knew Faith and may have lived nearby. They also believed the killer might have shown strange behaviors afterward, perhaps talking excessively about the case, showing unusual interest in news reports, or otherwise drawing attention to themselves. Nearly 2 years later, in July 2014, a court order compelled Chapel Hill Police to release around 300 pages of case documents. Later, in September, the long-awaited autopsy report was finally made public. The family's painful suspicions were confirmed. Faith had been brutally attacked. The case documents revealed some surprising details about the early investigation. Only 2 apartments had been searched in the days immediately following Faith's death, her own and another unit within the same complex. Some reports suggested that the wooded area directly behind the apartment was never fully searched. Even more surprising, no scent tracking dogs were used, and officers did not conduct thorough door-to-door interviews with neighbors. For many observers, these omissions seemed like critical missed opportunities in the crucial first days. Another potential lead came from Faith's own phone. Records showed that on the night she died, she called her friend Una Chavez 3 times. One of these calls left behind a voicemail, though not in the usual sense. Investigators believed it was an accidental recording, captured while the phone was in Faith's pocket or otherwise activated without her realizing. The message was garbled and difficult to interpret, but those who listened closely thought they could detect voices and sounds in the background. Some listeners believed it revealed a heated argument. Others dismissed it as typical nightclub noise. The voicemail became a source of both intrigue and controversy. Journalists and independent researchers took an interest, and one reporter in particular became deeply invested in the case. He launched a blog and later a podcast, hoping to gather attention and crowdsource information that might bring clarity. Working with a respected forensic audio specialist named Wes, the journalist had the voicemail analyzed using advanced techniques. Wes, a veteran in audio enhancement, concluded that there were likely 4 distinct voices in the recording, 2 male and 2 female. Though the interpretation was far from definitive, the possibility that Faith's phone had captured a snapshot of her final moments added yet another layer of urgency to the investigation. The voicemail message attributed to Faith's phone was time-stamped at 1:23 a.m. on September 7th, 2012. On paper, that placed the recording just before she and her roommate, Karina Rosario, were seen on surveillance footage leaving the Thrill nightclub. By 2:07 a.m., security cameras clearly captured both women walking out of the club together. To outside eyes, nothing seemed out of the ordinary in that moment. They looked like any other pair of college students heading home after a night out, Yet as investigators carefully pieced together the events of that night, inconsistencies began to appear. The timeline, which initially seemed straightforward, was suddenly clouded by unanswered questions. Forensic audio analyst Arlo West, one of the experts who reviewed the case, openly questioned the reliability of the voicemail's timestamp. If the message had really been recorded at 1:23 a.m., how could that align with video proof showing Faith still at the nightclub nearly an hour later? West explained that both Faith and her close friend, Una Chavez, owned the same model of phone, devices that were notorious for occasional issues with timekeeping and message stamping. In addition, he pointed out that the area's cell towers were unreliable, which could easily have caused delays or errors in how calls and voicemails were logged. In his professional opinion, the voicemail may not have been recorded at the official time shown on the metadata. Instead, it could have happened later, possibly closer to the critical window of time after the women returned home. Although Chapel Hill police agreed to examine West's enhanced version of the audio, they ultimately dismissed the theory. Investigators stated that they trusted the digital records and did not believe the recording captured the moment Faith was fatally attacked. For them, the voicemail remained an ambiguous piece of evidence, potentially important, but not definitive. By 2015, years had passed without an arrest. Despite the lack of closure, police reassured the public that they were confident the DNA evidence would eventually identify the killer. They declined to share exact details, such as where the DNA had been collected or what items it had been found on, but expressed optimism that advances in forensic technology would provide answers. While the investigation moved slowly, Faith's absence was deeply felt on campus. Vigils were held in her honor, including a traditional Native American ceremony to celebrate her life and spirit. Friends remembered her as someone who radiated kindness, a young woman who was both ambitious and compassionate. To many students, Faith wasn't just a friend or classmate. She was a cultural sister, someone who carried her heritage proudly while also uplifting those around her. The grief of losing her reverberated through the community, and the fear that her killer remained free cast a long shadow. In 2016, a breakthrough gave the case renewed momentum. Using DNA recovered from the scene, a lab in Virginia produced a composite sketch of a possible suspect. The technology, called forensic phenotyping, could predict physical features such as eye color, hair color, skin tone, facial shape, and even likely ancestry. The generated image suggested the suspect was of mixed background, likely Native American combined with either European or Latino heritage. While investigators emphasized that the sketch was not a perfect likeness, it provided the public with something tangible, a face to associate with the long unsolved crime. Meanwhile, detectives continued examining individuals connected to Faith. Among those scrutinized was a man spotted leaving the Thrill nightclub the same night as Faith and Karina. He had arrived at the club earlier with 3 other people, and all 4 were questioned extensively. Each provided DNA samples, but none matched the genetic evidence collected from Faith's apartment. Attention also focused heavily on Eric, Karina's ex-boyfriend. Their relationship had been volatile, and many believed Eric resented Faith for encouraging Karina to distance herself from him. Investigators uncovered troubling digital evidence. Text messages Eric sent on September 6th hinted at something ominous. In one, he asked a friend for forgiveness for something he was about to do. Around the same time, he posted a similar statement on Twitter. Then, just 3 days after Faith's death, he wrote a cryptic message on Facebook. "Dear Lord, forgive me for all of my sins and the sins I may commit today. Protect me from the girls who don't deserve me and the ones who wish me dead today." The timing of these posts alarmed investigators and intensified public suspicion. Police seized Eric's vehicle and searched his residence for potential evidence. Yet despite the troubling behavior, nothing linked him directly to the crime. His DNA did not match the sample from the crime scene, and without that connection, investigators could not tie him to the attack. While Eric cooperated with authorities, detectives never fully cleared him. To this day, he remains a person of interest, with police suggesting that even if he wasn't directly involved, he may still know more than he has revealed. Faith's family, meanwhile, struggled with lingering doubts about those closest to her. Her father, Roland, has spoken publicly about his belief that Karina, Faith's roommate, might hold information she has not shared. Others, too, have raised questions about Karina's behavior in the hours and days following the tragedy. The most notable example is the 911 call she placed. The call lasted more than 8 minutes, but during that time, Karina never once mentioned Faith by name. Nor did she acknowledge that another friend, Marisol, was also present in the apartment. To some listeners, this created the impression that she was alone. Critics of the call have pointed to the unusual wording and delivery as reasons to believe Karina might know more than she admitted. From the earliest days of the investigation, police noted that Karina Rosario's version of events left behind a series of lingering questions. Detectives recorded inconsistencies in her statements, small details that didn't always align when compared across interviews or when weighed against physical evidence. For investigators, these contradictions were not proof of wrongdoing, but they did raise the possibility that Karina knew more than she had initially shared. One particularly telling moment came from a neighbor who happened to cross paths with Karina and her friend, Marisol, only minutes after Faith was discovered. According to that neighbor, the two young women did not appear visibly shaken or distressed, a reaction that seemed unusual given the horrifying discovery they had just made. Though everyone processes shock differently, the observation added to the questions swirling around Karina's role and her reliability as a witness. The timeline of Karina's movements that night further complicated matters. She had reportedly left the Thrill nightclub early because she wasn't feeling well. Yet just a few hours later, she left the apartment again, this time with the front door left unlocked. She was picked up by a university soccer player, Jordan McRae. Later, Jordan's roommate noticed what appeared to be a small red mark on Karina's clothing from that day. When police were notified, they searched for the shirt in question and conducted forensic testing. However, the results came back inconclusive. Authorities could not determine whether the stain was blood, and the test did not link Karina to the crime. Even with no direct physical evidence tying her to Faith's murder, Karina remained a central figure in the investigation. Private investigator Hunter Glass, who worked closely with Faith's family, believed the truth might hinge on her. Glass suspected that a disagreement between Karina and Faith, possibly sparked at the nightclub and potentially involving jealousy or relationship issues, could have been the catalyst that set off the tragic chain of events. His theory, while unproven, echoed the suspicions of many who followed the case closely. Not long after the tragedy, Karina left North Carolina. She avoided the public eye and never spoke openly about the case. Faith's father, Roland, later revealed that she stopped answering his calls as well, a silence that only fueled his doubts. Nevertheless, police maintained that Karina had been cooperative each time they formally reached out. For law enforcement, she remained an important figure in the story, though never officially charged or declared a suspect. As the investigation widened, detectives turned their attention to other individuals who had been close to Faith. Karina herself revealed that Faith had been romantically involved with both her longtime high school boyfriend, Alex, and with Ty Michael McNeil, a young man she dated intermittently while at UNC. These relationships created a web of emotional complexity that investigators needed to carefully untangle. Karina described Ty as emotionally intense, someone whose passions sometimes crossed into troubling behavior. She claimed that Faith once confided in her about an argument during which Ty had pushed her against a wall. Another close friend, Una Chavis, the same person who received the mysterious voicemail from Faith's phone on the night of her death, echoed these concerns. Both women worried that Ty's temper could have played a role in the events of that night. Ty was later interviewed during a 2018 case review. He told investigators that on the evening before Faith's death, he had texted her, hoping to spend time together. He said she never responded until 3:52 a.m., when he received a sudden, affectionate message from her phone. On its face, the message seemed warm, even loving. Yet both Roland and Una believed something about it felt wrong. To them, it didn't sound like Faith. Just days earlier, she had told Yuna that she wanted to rekindle her relationship with Alex, which made the late-night message to Ty appear out of character. Ty provided a DNA sample, and he also claimed he had an alibi. But he admitted he was never sure whether police had fully cleared him. His name continued to hover in the background of theories and speculation, another unresolved piece of a puzzle that refused to come together. For nearly a decade, the investigation remained in limbo. Faith's murder became one of the most haunting cold cases in North Carolina, marked by suspicion, whispered theories, and an endless stream of unanswered questions. Friends, former partners, roommates, and acquaintances all came under scrutiny. Leads were pursued, evidence was tested, and timelines were reconstructed again and again. And yet, no arrests came. Then, in 2021, everything changed. On September 16, 2021, the Chapel Hill Police Department announced a stunning development: the arrest of 28-year-old Miguel Salguero Olivares of Durham, North Carolina. The breakthrough did not come from new witness testimony or a long-awaited confession. Instead, it came through DNA. In August of that year, Salguero Olivares had been arrested in neighboring Wake County on a DUI charge. As part of standard procedure, his genetic profile was entered into a database. To the astonishment of investigators, it matched DNA that had been collected from Faith's apartment nearly 9 years earlier. The long-awaited connection had finally been made. Court documents revealed that the DNA was not the only link tying him to the crime. A palm print recovered from the suspected weapon, a liquor bottle found in the bedroom, was also matched to Salguero Olivares. Combined, these two pieces of evidence created a powerful case against him. Perhaps most surprising was the fact that Salguero Olivares' name had never surfaced in the early years of the investigation. He had not been publicly identified as a suspect, nor had he been among those questioned in the immediate aftermath. His sudden emergence, nearly a decade later, stunned the community and reignited interest in a case that many feared might never be solved. For Faith's family, the arrest brought a mixture of relief and renewed grief. Relief that answers might finally be within reach. Grief that it had taken nearly 10 years to come to this point, years filled with pain, suspicion, and uncertainty. For the community of Chapel Hill, the development was a reminder that even in long unsolved cases, persistence, science, and time can eventually bring the truth to light. When the investigation finally began to yield results, Chief of Police Chris Blue addressed the public with carefully chosen words. He urged patience, reminding both the community and the press that justice is a process, not an event. "This story will take time to completely unfold," he said, emphasizing that every detail had to be handled with precision. His message carried both reassurance and caution, an acknowledgement of how far the case had come and how much further it still had to go before answers could be delivered in full. Then, in November 2024, the legal battle took another decisive turn. Prosecutors filed an amendment to the original indictment, introducing 2 additional charges: first-degree burglary and a first-degree offense. These new allegations did more than increase the seriousness of the case. They painted a clearer picture of what prosecutors believed had happened that night in Faith's apartment. The burglary charge suggested that the crime was not only an act of violence, but also a premeditated intrusion. The first-degree offense underscored the severity of the accusations, leaving no doubt that the state intended to pursue the harshest penalties available under the law. For Faith's family, the amended indictment was bittersweet. On the one hand, the progress confirmed what they had long hoped for. The case was moving forward, gaining momentum, and being treated with the full weight it deserved. On the other hand, each new charge brought a fresh wave of pain, forcing them to relive the loss of their daughter and sister. The arrest of Miguel Salguero Olivares had given the case a name and a face, but it also introduced new mysteries. Who exactly was Miguel? How did he cross paths with Faith, a young woman whose circle of friends and daily life appeared far removed from his own? What circumstances led him to that apartment on that particular night in 2012? And most importantly, what truly happened in the final moments before Faith's life was taken? These were the questions echoing not only in the courtroom, but also in the hearts of the Chapel Hill community. For the public, the arrest represented both closure and new uncertainty. After nearly a decade of doubt, suspicion, and theories, there was finally a legal proceeding. Yet the case was only entering its next phase, a slow-moving journey through hearings, motions, and evidence reviews. For Faith's family, it was a long-awaited step toward justice. For the wider community, it was the beginning of another chapter, a difficult but necessary path toward uncovering the full truth. Media coverage highlighted the sheer scale of the trial preparations. By January 20th, 2025, court filings showed that attorneys on both sides were preparing for preliminary hearings and the critical evidence phase. The case file had ballooned to over 39,000 pages of documents, a mountain of information that needed to be reviewed line by line. In addition, nearly 30 expert witnesses were being scheduled to testify. Specialists in DNA, forensic science, digital evidence, psychology, and other fields that could help reconstruct what happened. The scope of the preparation illustrated just how complex and significant the trial had become. Despite the mounting anticipation, progress in the courtroom moved slowly. Motions were filed, hearings were postponed, and schedules were rearranged. Legal experts explained that this was not unusual for a case of such magnitude. With so much evidence to sift through, and with charges as serious as first-degree murder and burglary, the system prioritized thoroughness over speed. For Faith's loved ones, however, the delays were agonizing. Each rescheduled hearing meant more waiting, more unanswered questions, and more time spent in the painful limbo between tragedy and resolution. As of July 20th, 25, official records confirmed that Miguel Salguero Olivares remained in custody at the Durham County Jail, held without the possibility of bail. Prosecutors considered additional charges, but the court ultimately decided to postpone those decisions, pushing the case forward to September 2025. The delay added yet another layer of frustration for those seeking closure, but it also signaled that the trial was approaching a pivotal stage. Faith's story, already marked by nearly a decade of silence before the arrest, had now become one of the most closely followed cases in North Carolina. For her family, every development carried the weight of both sorrow and hope. Sorrow for the years stolen from their daughter, sister, and friend. Hope that the truth, no matter how painful, would finally come to light. And so, as the legal process continued into 2025, one reality remained clear. The pursuit of justice for Faith Hedgepeth was far from over. The community, the courts, and most of all, her family were still waiting. Waiting for the day when patience, perseverance, and the relentless work of investigators would finally deliver the answers that Faith deserved. When the officers arrived at Sarah's residence, they were immediately struck by details that suggested something was terribly wrong. At first glance, they noticed that a window pane beside the front door had been smashed. Despite this obvious damage, the front door itself was still securely locked, giving the impression that no one had gone in or out through it. The officers knocked several times, loudly enough to be heard inside, but the house remained silent. No voice answered, no footsteps approached. Deciding to check the rest of the property, they moved carefully around to the back of the house. There, they discovered that the sliding glass door was unlocked. The discovery was unsettling, but it also gave them a way inside. Proceeding with caution, they entered the home. As the officers advanced further into the house, they eventually reached the living room. It was there that the grim reality confronted them. Lying on the floor, completely motionless, was Sarah. The sight confirmed their worst fears. Dear viewers, please don't forget to like, leave a comment under the video, and subscribe to the channel so as not to miss new videos. This is very important to us. Sarah Raris Williamson entered the world on June 20th, 1963, in the warm climate of Florida. Her early years were shaped by her father's career in the U.S. Army. Because of his military service, the family lived for a while on base housing, surrounded by the strict routines and close-knit community of military life. Eventually, the Williamsons relocated to Albuquerque, New Mexico, where they hoped for a quieter, more settled environment. It was there that Sarah's personality began to truly shine. From a very young age, Sarah showed signs of unusual intelligence. Teachers noticed her talent in mathematics almost immediately. Numbers came easily to her, and what seemed complicated to other students appeared to Sarah as an exciting puzzle. Testing later revealed her IQ was exceptionally high, and without much effort, she consistently achieved top grades. But Sarah wasn't only about equations and problem solving. She had an insatiable love for reading, often sneaking crime novels into her school bag and staying up late at night to finish just one more chapter. By the time she reached her later high school years, she was already imagining herself writing a novel of her own, one where clever reasoning and observation would unlock the darkest of mysteries. Her personality was vibrant. Sarah was known as an energetic and outgoing young woman, someone who could balance intellectual curiosity with a lively social life. She had many friends, was active in school activities, and always found time to spend with her beloved older sister. Those who knew her often described her as a rare combination of brilliance and warmth. After high school, Sarah chose to pursue mathematics more formally. She enrolled at a university close to Albuquerque, where she thrived in her studies and earned her degree with distinction. During this time, she met a fellow student named Cohen. Their relationship grew quickly, and soon after graduation, they married. Sarah originally had plans to continue her education immediately, aiming for a master's in statistics, but life presented her with an opportunity she couldn't turn down. A highly attractive job offers at a military base. It was the kind of role that could fast-track her career. After gaining valuable experience there, she and Cohen eventually relocated to Maryland. Sarah soon secured a position with the National Security Agency as a statistical analyst, a dream job for someone of her skills. The position was demanding, but she thrived. Sarah quickly built a reputation for being a creative problem solver who could analyze enormous amounts of data and still see the human stories hidden in the numbers. Even as her career advanced, Sarah kept another passion alive. In the evenings, she began writing her own crime novel. The central character was a statistician, much like herself, who used logic, patterns, and data to uncover the truth behind a murder. Friends later said that this project gave them a glimpse into Sarah's imagination, a world where intellect could unravel even the most complicated mysteries. But while her professional life was blossoming, her personal life grew complicated. After 3 years of marriage, her relationship with Cohen began to deteriorate. The couple eventually separated and divorced. Sarah poured herself into her work and also decided to revisit her academic dreams. She enrolled in evening classes at Johns Hopkins University to pursue a master's degree in statistics. There she met Lorenzo, a 25-year-old business and finance student. At the time, Sarah was 27. Both had gone through divorces before, and perhaps that shared experience helped them connect. Their relationship soon turned serious, and after Sarah completed her master's degree, the two married. They chose to settle in Elkridge, an affluent suburban community near Baltimore. The neighborhood was peaceful, the kind of place that seemed ideal for raising a family. 3 years into their marriage, they welcomed a son. But almost as soon as the baby arrived, Lorenzo's behavior began to shift. Friends and neighbors noticed he seemed distant, even cold. At home, he grew increasingly controlling towards Sarah, questioning her decisions and isolating her socially. His indifference to their newborn son deeply troubled her. After enduring this growing tension, Sarah made the difficult decision to end the marriage. By the time she was 35, she and Lorenzo were officially divorced. Their son, just 1 year old, primarily lived with Sarah, though weekends were spent with his father, who had moved back in with his parents nearby. Sarah tried to keep life as stable as possible for her child, balancing her demanding work at the NSA with the responsibilities of being a single mother. On Friday, November 13th, 1998, Sarah followed the usual custody arrangement and dropped her son off at Lorenzo's home. That Saturday, she spent the day with her close friend, Laura. The two women had always supported each other through life's ups and downs, and their friendship was a source of comfort for Sarah. They had made plans to talk again the following morning. Sunday arrived, but Laura never received Sarah's expected call. Concerned, she tried reaching out by phone, but Sarah didn't answer. That's when Laura discovered she had a voicemail waiting. The timestamp showed it had been left the previous evening at 8:46 p.m., when Laura had already gone to bed. Back in the late 1990s, voicemail systems didn't display the caller ID. You had to dial in and listen. Thinking it might be from Sarah, Laura played the message. What she heard left her unsettled. The tone was chilling enough that Laura immediately called the police. She requested officers check on her friend without delay. When officers arrived at Sarah's home, they quickly noticed signs that something wasn't right. A window pane next to the front door had been shattered, yet the door itself was locked tight. No one answered when they knocked repeatedly. Moving around to the back, they found the sliding glass door unlocked. They entered cautiously. What puzzled investigators immediately was that the alarm system connected to the sliding door was still armed. Logically, if an intruder had entered through the front or back, the system should have been triggered. This odd detail raised questions right away. As they stepped further inside, they reached the living room. And there, they were confronted with a heartbreaking sight. Sarah was lying motionless on the floor. It was clear that nothing could be done to save her. Fearing that her young child might also be in danger, officers rushed through the house, calling out and searching every room. Not knowing the boy had spent the weekend with his father, they feared the worst and initially suspected a possible abduction. Relief only came later. When it was confirmed, the child was safe. Sarah's body was transported to the medical examiner's office, while detectives turned their full attention to the crime scene. Detectives at the scene worked quickly to reconstruct what had taken place. It didn't take long for them to conclude that the person responsible had almost certainly entered through the broken front window. That particular window, like the others in the home, had been wired to the alarm system, but the sensor was positioned on the frame. The design meant the alarm would only trigger if the window was physically opened, not if the glass itself was shattered. By smashing the glass and climbing through, the intruder bypassed the alarm entirely. Later analysis showed fingerprints around the frame, though they were too smudged to be of use. What was clear, however, was that the same route had been used to leave the residence as well. Inside the house, the disorder told its own story. Investigators noted that a drawer in the living room had been pulled wide open, and all the VHS tapes stored there were strewn across the floor. Even more curious, the VCR unit was missing altogether. In the kitchen, every cabinet door had been left open, as if someone had gone through them in a frantic search. At first glance, the whole scene seemed to scream burglary. But seasoned detectives felt uneasy about that explanation. If theft had been the primary motive, why were Sarah's most valuable possessions, her laptop and her wallet, left sitting untouched on the kitchen table? It seemed less like a robbery and more like someone had staged a false picture of one, using the chaos to disguise another motive entirely. Adding to the mystery was the level of force used in the attack. The intensity suggested more than just opportunistic crime. It spoke of anger, resentment, or perhaps even hatred directed personally at Sarah. And one detail puzzled investigators deeply. Why would the intruder choose the front window at all? The back of the house was concealed by woods and would have provided much more privacy. Smashing glass at the front carried a greater risk of drawing attention. The only logical explanation was that the attacker understood the alarm system and deliberately chose the window because they knew it wouldn't trigger a response. Forensic teams combed through the house, but despite the abundance of potential touchpoints, they came up empty-handed. No usable fingerprints, no shoe impressions clear enough to trace, and no fibers that could be confidently matched. What they did collect was a large quantity of biological material, which they carefully packaged for later DNA analysis. Out in the backyard, officers made a chilling discovery: a machete lying discarded in the grass. Based on its placement and appearance, Investigators believed it to be the weapon used. The presence of such a weapon reinforced their suspicion that this was not random but intensely personal. With the crime scene secured and evidence gathered, detectives turned their attention to Sarah's immediate circle. The first relief came when they confirmed her young son was safe with his father, Lorenzo. That removed their worst fear, that the child might also be missing. With that reassurance, they moved forward with interviews. Friends, colleagues, and family members were asked about Sarah's recent life. Was there anyone she had argued with? Any disputes, grudges, or signs she might have been in danger? Across the board, people painted the same picture. Sarah was compassionate, approachable, and had no history of conflicts. She had a bright energy that drew people in rather than pushed them away. The only point of tension, mentioned again and again, was her ex-husband. Her closest friend, Laura, was especially forthcoming. She described the difficult decline of Sarah's marriage to Lorenzo. Before their son was born, Lorenzo had already been struggling. He had been prescribed antidepressants, but at some point, he stopped taking them. After the child's arrival, his personality seemed to shift even more dramatically. Instead of adjusting to fatherhood, Lorenzo became controlling, monitoring Sarah's activities, questioning her loyalty, and demanding constant attention. Sarah confided in Laura that she often felt smothered and increasingly unsafe. The situation worsened after Sarah returned to work. Lorenzo became convinced she was having an affair with her supervisor at the NSA. He even went so far as to show up at her workplace and voice his accusations. Because of the sensitive nature of her job, his claims triggered a full internal investigation. Dozens of employees were interviewed. In the end, no evidence whatsoever supported Lorenzo's story, and Sarah was cleared entirely. But even with that outcome, Lorenzo refused to drop the accusation. His obsession with the idea continued to grow. The marriage reached a crisis point during one of their heated arguments, when Lorenzo introduced a weapon into the confrontation. That incident was Sarah's final straw. Realizing the danger, she filed for divorce immediately afterward. She also sought legal protection, obtaining a restraining order against him. Still, beyond that court order, no further action was taken. From that point on, her contact with Lorenzo was limited. She would see him in courtrooms as they battled over custody or during the brief exchanges when she dropped their son off at Lorenzo's parents' house, since visitation rights had been legally granted. In the weeks leading up to her death, Sarah had grown increasingly uneasy. Her sister later revealed that just one day before the murder, Sarah had confided in her fears. She admitted she was afraid of Lorenzo and worried he might harm her before the court made its final custody decision. That revelation alone was enough for detectives to focus on him as their prime person of interest. When investigators approached Lorenzo with the news, his reaction was dramatic. He fell to his knees, covered his face, and began shouting in grief. The display seemed genuine to some, though others in law enforcement quietly noted that such an outward performance can sometimes be just that: performance. Once he regained his composure, detectives began their questioning. Lorenzo denied any involvement in Sarah's death. Instead, he circled back to his long-standing accusations, insisting they look into Sarah's boss. He repeated his claim that she had been romantically involved at work, despite the fact that it had already been thoroughly disproven. As for his own whereabouts, Lorenzo said he had been at home the entire night. His parents and family members confirmed his statement, standing by his side and providing him an alibi. Detectives, however, recognized the fragility of such testimony. Alibis from family carry less weight, as loved ones can easily provide cover, whether knowingly or unknowingly. Investigators moved forward methodically. As part of their standard procedure, they collected Lorenzo's DNA and fingerprints, carefully documenting every step to ensure that nothing could later be challenged in court. They also examined his body for any physical marks, scratches, bruises, or other signs that could suggest involvement in a physical confrontation. To their surprise, Lorenzo's skin was unmarked. There wasn't a single cut or scrape, not even something minor that might have occurred if he had been in a struggle. For detectives, This was frustrating. They had hoped for something conclusive. Determined not to stop there, the team secured a search warrant for both Lorenzo's home and his vehicle. Forensic experts went through every inch of his property. Carpets were examined for traces of blood, his trunk swabbed for fibers, and even the soles of his shoes tested against the impressions lifted from Sarah's home. But once again, nothing incriminating turned up. No traces of blood. No footprints or footwear that matched the prints left behind at the scene. No fibers that tied him to the crime. It was as if he had either been extraordinarily careful or had nothing to do with it at all. Recognizing the gravity of the investigation, Lorenzo quickly retained a high-powered defense attorney, the kind of lawyer with a reputation for aggressively protecting clients. The presence of a skilled defense team shifted the dynamic almost immediately. Detectives knew that every move from this point forward would be challenged, scrutinized, and potentially dismantled in court. With the trail against Lorenzo growing cold, they reluctantly began widening their scope. The next logical person of interest was Sarah's former supervisor at the NSA. However, by the time investigators tracked him down, he had already resigned from his post and moved out of state. The NSA, alarmed by the possibility that one of their former employees had been murdered, decided to conduct an internal review in parallel with local law enforcement. They had their own investigative team shadow the case. When Sarah's former boss was contacted, he remained firm. His relationship with Sarah had been entirely professional. Moreover, he provided an alibi for the night of the murder. He had been at dinner with a group of friends in another state. Investigators verified this, and his alibi held up. That line of inquiry quickly closed. Meanwhile, attention turned once again to the strange voicemail Sarah's friend had received on the night of the murder. Audio specialists were tasked with enhancing the recording, hoping that buried within the chaotic sounds they might find a clue. Detectives were particularly interested in whether a voice could be identified, perhaps even the attackers. After careful digital cleanup, experts reported that they believed Sarah's voice could be heard saying the name Mike. This revelation immediately raised concerns. Lorenzo's younger brother, Michelangelo, who went by Mike, was living in the same house with his parents and Lorenzo at the time. When detectives learned this, their suspicion shifted. If Sarah had uttered the name Mike during her final moments, could she have been identifying her assailant? Mike was brought in for questioning. Detectives played the enhanced voicemail for him directly, asking if he could hear his name. He shook his head, claiming it was impossible to make out any distinct words at all. To be fair, even investigators admitted the recording was far from clear. But Mike's demeanor during questioning raised eyebrows. He appeared nervous, his hands trembling slightly, and when detectives later drove him back home, he stepped out of the car and vomited on the spot. The physical reaction unsettled the officers. Though suspicious, there was no concrete evidence against him. Hoping that his conscience might one day weigh him down, the lead detective quietly slipped Mike his phone number, urging him to call if he ever wanted to tell the truth. But before anything could come of it, Lorenzo's attorney intervened once more. This time, the lawyer declared that from now on, law enforcement could not speak to Mike without legal counsel present. That effectively shut down any casual questioning. With their primary leads thinning, detectives expanded the net. They reached out to Sarah's first husband, Cohen, to ensure there were no unresolved issues from the past. He was quickly cleared. They also spoke with Lorenzo's ex-wife. She not only denied any involvement, but also agreed to assist investigators in a creative way. At police request, her phone was tapped. She placed a call to Lorenzo, carefully steering the conversation to see if he might slip up and reveal something new. Lorenzo, however, was steadfast. He repeated his original story and denied any knowledge of who could have harmed Sarah. Another theory emerged during this lull in the investigation. Sarah's work at the NSA. She had access to highly classified material, and detectives could not immediately dismiss the possibility that her death was somehow connected to her career. Was it possible that sensitive knowledge had placed her in danger? To answer that, the NSA's internal team conducted its own thorough review. After weeks of digging, they reported back, There was no indication her work was connected to the crime. The theory was ruled out. Then, a month after the murder, there was finally movement. The crime lab completed its exhaustive analysis of the evidence collected at Sarah's home. Within their report was a development no one expected. They had isolated DNA from an unidentified male, appearing in 3 separate blood samples inside the house. When compared to Lorenzo's genetic profile, there was no match. Investigators checked against Mike's DNA as well as their father's, and again, no match. The genetic material belonged to someone entirely different. This revelation was a shock. Detectives had built their working theory almost entirely around Lorenzo. Yet the evidence now suggested the presence of another unknown man. If Sarah's ex-husband was innocent, then who had left their DNA at the crime scene? The discovery threw the case into uncertainty. Unfortunately, the breakthrough stalled as quickly as it came. With no matches in the DNA database and no new leads surfacing, detectives found themselves at a standstill. They reviewed cases involving known repeat offenders in the area, searching for any potential overlap, but nothing connected. The investigation began to cool, slowly drifting toward unsolved status. Months passed. Out of desperation, investigators sent the voicemail recording to the FBI, hoping for better technology to analyze it. The federal team managed to enhance it further, and their findings changed everything. Contrary to earlier assumptions, Sarah had not said Mike at all. The theory implicating Lorenzo's brother collapsed. For 7 long months, the case remained suspended in limbo. Detectives kept pushing, but no progress was made. Then, on June 1st, 1999, the lead detective received a call from the Baltimore County Police Department. The call that came in on June 1st carried news that would completely change the course of the investigation. An officer from the Baltimore County Police Department explained that one of their inmates had just confessed to killing Sarah. The inmate was a teenager, only 19 years old, named Ardell Tickles. He was already in custody, having been arrested 3 months earlier for an armed robbery at a McDonald's restaurant. While awaiting trial, Ardell had been talking to his cellmate, and in one of those late-night conversations, he made a chilling admission. He claimed he had killed a woman in her own home. His cellmate wasted no time. Realizing the value of this information, he struck a quick deal with prosecutors in exchange for leniency. To gather proof, he agreed to wear a wire and carefully coax details from Ardell. The plan worked. Over the course of their conversations, Ardell spoke openly, describing how he had broken into a house through a window, confronted a woman inside. Even more importantly, he mentioned the exact date of the crime, the same date Sarah had been killed. Detectives listening to the tapes were struck by how precise his timeline was. These were not vague boasts. These were details that lined up perfectly with the actual crime. When his cellmate asked the most important question, why, Ardell's answer was not what anyone expected. He explained that he hadn't acted on his own initiative at all. Instead, he said that someone had hired him to do it. According to Ardell, he had been promised $5,000 to take Sarah's life. Detectives were stunned. They had always suspected this crime was personal, possibly orchestrated by someone close to Sarah. But here was a young man admitting not only to carrying it out, but also to being paid for it. The lead detective immediately left for the jail to confront him face to face. Inside the interview room, Ardell did not attempt to deny his actions. With surprising calmness, he admitted that he had killed a woman, though he confessed he hadn't even known her name at the time. He spoke with a disturbing lack of remorse, saying that he believed Sarah was a bad person, and that in his mind, she had deserved punishment. He even complained that he had been cheated. He had only received $3,000 instead of the $5,000 he had been promised. The money, he added, was less important than the idea of punishing her. His words sent a chill through the detectives in the room. At that point, investigators wanted to know who had ordered the crime. They placed 3 photographs on the table, Lorenzo, his brother Mike, and their father, and asked Ardell to identify which one of them had hired him. But Ardell studied the photos and shook his head. He didn't recognize any of them. His explanation shocked the team. The person who had hired him had not been a man at all. It was a woman. He admitted he didn't even know her name, but he insisted she had given him precise instructions. That revelation raised dozens of new questions. Who was this woman? Ardell explained that only days before the murder, this woman had driven him to Sarah's house. She pointed out the property, told him when Sarah would most likely be alone, and even explained the layout of the alarm system, warning him not to tamper with it so the neighbors wouldn't be alerted. Whoever she was, she clearly knew Sarah's routines and security setup. Detectives now had a completely new angle to investigate. Ardell had been working at a nursing home laundry facility in Baltimore before his arrest, so police pulled the employee roster. They hoped he might recognize one of the names. As they scanned through the list, one name jumped out immediately, so familiar that it stopped them cold. The woman Ardell had been describing wasn't a stranger at all. It was Amelia, Lorenzo's mother, Sarah's own mother-in-law. To confirm, detectives returned to the jail with a photograph. The moment Ardell saw Amelia's picture, he pointed without hesitation. That was her. She was the one who had arranged everything. The revelation was staggering. For months, investigators had been looking at Lorenzo, wondering if he could have committed the crime. Now it seemed the orchestration had come from his own mother. Still, Ardell's testimony wasn't enough to secure a conviction against Amelia. Detectives knew they needed physical evidence and corroborating witnesses to tie her directly to the murder. They began speaking with employees at the nursing home where Ardell had worked, and eventually, one woman agreed to cooperate in exchange for full immunity. Her account provided damning details. She explained that on the day of the murder, Ardell had asked her to help him become a killer by renting a car for him, since he was too young to rent one himself. At first, she assumed he was joking and reluctantly went along with the request. Hours later, Ardell returned the car and made a disturbing statement. He told her he had just gotten rid of the devil and asked for her help once again. Together, they drove to a vacant lot. There, they set fire to several items, what investigators believed were pieces of evidence from the crime. On their way back, they were stopped by two police officers. The officers searched the vehicle and found a knife under one of the seats. But strangely, instead of arresting them, the officers simply confiscated the weapon and let them go. This baffling detail, overlooked at the time, became critical later. Detectives also uncovered financial evidence. Bank records revealed that just weeks before Sarah's death, Amelia had withdrawn $2,500 in cash. Shortly afterward, Ardell deposited almost the exact same amount into his own account. The correlation was difficult to dismiss. It appeared to be the payment for his role in the crime. Finally, forensic science closed the loop. Lab experts compared Ardell's DNA against the samples collected from the machete found behind Sarah's house. The results were undeniable. It was a perfect match. This connection tied him directly to the weapon, and with that evidence, investigators had enough to formally charge him with Sarah's murder. Right after that, detectives went after Amelia. The woman who, until then, had seemed like a quiet mother and grandmother was now at the center of a shocking conspiracy. She was brought into the station for questioning. For several hours, she sat in that room, silent and unmoving, clearly wrestling with the weight of the situation. Detectives gave her space, checking in occasionally, reminding her of the consequences. Finally, she asked to speak again. She waived her right to an attorney and said she was ready to confess. Her admission came slowly, piece by piece. Amelia explained that she had never truly accepted Sarah. She felt Sarah was distant, ungrateful, and dismissive of the family. When Sarah filed for divorce from Lorenzo, Amelia's resentment turned into fear. She was terrified that Sarah would cut her off from her grandson completely. That fear began to consume her. Eventually, she admitted, something inside her snapped. Amelia described how she had vented her frustrations to Ardell at work. According to her, she never meant for the situation to spiral into violence. She said that Ardell himself suggested she should take action and that he offered to help get back at Sarah for what Amelia called the disrespect. Amelia claimed Ardell told her he would do something minor, such as throwing rocks at Sarah's windows. Detectives, however, were highly skeptical. The details of the case didn't line up with Amelia's story. Why, they asked, would she have paid him thousands of dollars for such a petty act of vandalism? With Amelia's partial confession and Ardell's testimony, prosecutors moved the case toward trial. Ardell was the first to stand before a jury. His defense strategy was to shift the blame. He told the court that Amelia had manipulated him, preying on his youth and inexperience. He painted himself as someone tricked into committing the ultimate crime. In the end, he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Then it was Amelia's turn. Her trial began in January of 2000, and the courtroom atmosphere was tense. Yet one detail stood out. Not a single member of Amelia's family attended. Her husband, her children, even her beloved grandson, none of them showed up to support her. She was entirely alone. Her attorney argued fiercely that there wasn't enough evidence directly linking her to the crime. Yes, Ardell had pointed the finger at her, but he was a convicted robber and now a confessed killer. Hardly the most trustworthy witness. The lawyer emphasized that Amelia's so-called confession was filled with inconsistencies, insisting that she never admitted to ordering a murder, only to venting her frustrations. But prosecutors countered with hard facts. The bank withdrawal that matched Ardell's deposit, the testimony from the nursing home coworker, and Amelia's own admission that she had spoken to Ardell about Sarah. The weight of the evidence was impossible to dismiss. In the end, the jury found her guilty. Like Ardell, Amelia was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole.